And we're live.
Hi, welcome to AirPlay. Nice to see you again. I took a week off last week. I was traveling. I was in Kentucky. We have a really, really good play for you today by a master playwright, Brian McAvera, who hails from Ireland. This play has been done, and it's a very special piece. And without further ado, I'm going to give you to Kerry Wesolowski, who is our co-host and also playing the main role in this show. So this is kind of the Kerry show today. and our narrator, our wonderful narrator, Matt Matthew, excuse me, I'm losing this voice. So please, without further ado, Kerry.
Welcome back, Connie. It's great to see you. It's great to be here at AirPlay. I feel like it's getting to be doing one of Brian McAvera's plays is like an annual tradition this time of year.
Do it.
Yeah, we did it last year, November 15th. Today it's November 16th. So let me tell you, let me tell you, Brian McAvera is a really talented, wonderful playwright. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Brian McAvera is a dramatist, director, curator, and art historian. He's written over 25 stage plays, radio plays for the BBC and RTE, many of them translated, 2 television films, one of which he directed. And he's directed for the stage and was co-founder of the New Writers Theatre in Belfast in the early 1980s. His best-known plays published by Oberon Books include Picasso's Women, part of which we are doing today, a series of 8 monologues, and it was first performed at the National Theatre in London and at the Edinburgh Festival. They have since been translated into 15 languages. He's an artistic advisor to Focus Theatre Dublin and sits on the theatre committee of the Writers Guild. In the world of visual arts, he has published 12 books, including Art, Politics, and Ireland. He writes regularly for the Irish Arts Review and Sculpture in the USA. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am the director of this piece today, and I'm honored to be directing Brian McAvera's piece. I am also playing Marie-Therese. I was born and raised in New York City, and I'm an actor, director, host, and singer whose credits span film, television, theater, and now Zoom. I was the lead female actor and director of Simon Says, a finalist for the first annual Playbill Virtual Theater Festival 2020, which was really exciting. And I've most recently directed a preview of the opera, The Bird Lady, at the National Opera Center, which was exciting as well. Upcoming projects include a supporting role as Helen Hayes in Connie Kepfinger's Live from the Bardo, My Dinner with Mary, during a 2-week run in January 2022 at Theater for the New City in New York City as part of an AEA Off-Broadway showcase directed by the legendary Dan Carter. And now let me introduce our narrator, Matt Matthews. Matt immigrated to California from Texas many years ago. He's an actor, singer, theater director, choral director, and voice for hire. Recent Zoom projects include Dermalogic as Stansfield and Yellow Ribbons as director. Some favorite roles, Marley's Ghost in A Christmas Carol and Grimio in Taming of the Shrew. And now, without further ado, I give you Marie-Therese, Picasso's Women by Brian McAvera.
This is Picasso's Women. This is from Picasso's Women by Brian McAvera. Number 3, Marie-Therese. As with the other dramatic monologues, the aim is to insinuate her character to us, the audience, even though what she thinks and what we think may be 2 different things. Thus, we can build up a picture of her version of Picasso and, by inference, his picture of her. The fiction of this monologue is that She is dead, but currently inhabiting the body that she died with. She can recall any element of her past, but she tends to do so with the thoughts and feelings of that particular moment. Contrary to much received male opinion, Marie-Therese is a gentle, likable woman who always wants to think the best of everyone. Her voice has infinite gradations of tenderness, wistfulness, warmth, and nostalgic longing. Each dramatic monologue is a bit like the overlapping facet or perspective in a cubist painting. Incidents, motifs, and versions of events appear and reappear. Marie-Therese. Darkness. The room we will be observing, the stage room that is a flat in Boulevard Henri Cotte in 1944. To be more precise, this is the room which still exists in the imaginative recreation of Marie-Therese Walter. Perhaps it is simply an empty space, except for the rear of the stage, which is covered with either reproductions or projected slides of those works which Picasso made of Marie-Therese Walter during the 30s. Woman as voluptuousness incarnate. Fade in and up. The sounds of a trim young woman exercising on the trampoline. As the lights rise, the trampoline sounds fade and she glides in, an ethereal vision made manifest.
They'll tell you he stopped loving me. It's not true, really. Cross my heart and hope to die. I am a ninny. How can I hope to die when I'm dead already? No need of a trampoline now. But just look at me. 34 years old, blonde, tall, shapely. Pneumatique, as the boys used to say. Well, actually, they used to say things that were much ruder than that. Tristan Zara, that is. You know, that nice Romanian boy with a mouth like a sewer who used to write poetry that I never could understand. Well, he said that if you gave me a nice, good novelette and a box of chocolates, then I could be, you know, without being distracted. But that was only because I wouldn't sleep with him. He couldn't believe that I wouldn't sleep with him. But he was a nice man because he told Pablo that what Pablo needed was a blonde. And then Pablo found me. Oh dear, I really am a ninny. Here I am, chattering on as we look at me in 1944. Why does that year matter?
In a loving tone, as she imitates Picasso's thick accent.
Today, Marie-Therese, the 13th of July, 1944, is the 17th anniversary of your birth in me, and also your own birth into this world where, having met me, I have begun to live. You ever think he wrote such lovely words to Olga, or Dora, or Francois? July 13th, 1937, my birthday. I was 18, and we went to a hotel in Neuilly. But I haven't told you how we met. It was 6 months earlier, a cold day in January, and I was standing in front of the Galeries Lafayette department store on the Boulevard Haussmann, waiting on a girlfriend. And there he was, in his fine, thick overcoat, staring at me. He even walked around me once or twice as if he couldn't believe his eyes.
She imitates his thick accent again.
Miss, you have an interesting face. I would like to do your portrait. I am Picasso. Oh, I didn't know who he was, did I? That took him by surprise. He looked as if he couldn't quite believe it. But I wasn't interested in paintings. Did I tell you my father was a painter? No. I never met my daddy. On my birth certificate, it says father unknown. Mommy liked paintings, and she played classical music on the piano and read classical literature, but I never bothered with any of that. Now gymnastics, that I do enjoy. But I'm forgetting, amn't I? He simply grabbed me by the arm and asked if I'd like breakfast. I was hungry and it was free, so I had a plate of bacon and eggs, a whole basket of rolls, and 4 cups of coffee. But what use is a croissant to a gymnast? And he was so amazed that he asked me if I was English, as he'd never seen anyone other than the English or the Americans eating like that so early in the morning. Poor dear, he was such a diabolical man, but I knew he couldn't help it. We met 2 days later at Saint-Lazare Metro.
Imitating his accent?
We will do great things together. I'm afraid to say that I burst out laughing. But wasn't he a foreigner and a nice man with a lovely thick accent? He was wearing a blue serge suit, but he could never keep the creases. He always had things in his pockets: packets of cigarettes, small sketchbooks, matches, bits of crayon, pencils. And he had a white shirt with a red and black tie. I still have the tie. And when he'd shove his hands into his coat pockets searching for something, the tips of the fingers would be grubby with crayon dust and bits of tobacco. He told me he was married, but I didn't care. He had such beautiful black currant eyes and a thick, dark, shiny lock of hair that wandered over his forehead. And he was so stocky, proud, erect. He seemed to look at you and into you and all around you and will you to do what he wanted. And he had such powerful yet feminine hands. You've understood me, haven't you? A woman doesn't resist Picasso. I did for 6 months. I was 17. I knew nothing. I was innocent, a gamin, but it was me that he selected. Me, out of the hundreds, the thousands who threw themselves at him. Did you know that Manet did the same? It's true. Pablo told me. Manet was strolling along the boulevards when he saw Victorine Morant among the crowds, and he selected her. And she became his model and his inspiration. And she lives now in his paintings. You remember that one, The Picnic. Doesn't she look beautiful? And it's her you look at because everyone else has their clothes on. I never really thought of him as old. I suppose he would have been older than my father, whoever he was, because Pablo must have been, 46, 47, but he didn't make you think of age. We used to go to suburban bars and discreet hotels, even boating on the Mere, and though he always said that he hated water. Once I stayed at a children's camp while Picasso and Olga stayed nearby. We had to be very careful because I was legally a minor, and the French law took the corruption of a minor very seriously. But he could be so terribly gentle. He asked me right at the start if I would help him with his fantasies. What did I know of how to please a man? He taught me. I only know what he was kind enough to show me, and I've never wanted any other man. At first, I used to laugh at what he wanted. Well, if you're 17 or 18, it's a giggle, isn't it? He didn't want me to laugh, though. He was always telling me to be serious. Poor Pablo. He needed so much and so often and in such funny positions. I didn't always like the sore bits. It was an adventure, wasn't it? It was an adventure. Did you know that he wrote poetry about me? I was the only one who touched him to words.
She produces a much-worn sheaf of paper.
A slice of melon, which never remains quiet, laughing at everyone as long as summer lasts. A lilac dove, laughing there. He didn't want people to know. It was our secret. So he used to write in his little black sketchbooks that he carried in his pocket. And if he couldn't think of the right word, he'd put a tiny blotch of color. And then later he'd do in the little line drawings around them. And he would always write me letters, always in the later years, lovely letters, each of them starting with our monogram, MTW looped onto a P, and each of them ending with a date in Roman numerals. And he'd write, and I'd hear him in my head.
She imitates his voice.
I love you a bit more every instant. Beautiful love of my life, Marie-Therese. They're honest words, aren't they? And there'd be little sketches around the edges of bouquets of rampant flowers, of me, rampant. I always cried with Pablo. I bowed my head in front of him. He was so wonderfully terrible. And he used to tell me stories. There was the one about two lovers, one French, one Spanish, who lived together happily and lovingly until she learned to speak his language. And then he noticed how stupid she was. So the romance was at an end. It was such a sad, sad story. And I know Olga made him very unhappy. He said, I banished the monsters from his paintings, whereas she put them in. Of course, he kept making paintings and drawings.
She looks at the images on the walls.
I must admit that they didn't really bowl me over. I kept telling him when he started to paint me all the time, but they don't look like me, Pablo. And he'd smile and say, but they don't have to. Marie-Therese, a painting is not a reflection. It's a jaw that snatches at a bit of the soul. So Pablo had his painting, and I had my cycling, my mountaineering, my table tennis, and my gymnastics. Sometimes he used to ask me if I'd like to go to a vernissage, so I would ask him if he'd like to go mountaineering. He was so various a man. There was always something else happening. When he bought Wesolowski, it was like visiting this new world. A chateau with a park and stables and outhouses of all sorts, like a coach house and a great round dovecote and a lovely Gothic chapel in the back courtyard. Facing the stables, which he turned into studios and started to people with sculptures, only nobody knew for years and years and years and years that they were all of me. There was no electricity, just the kerosene lamps and the junk, the bolts and the pots and the pans, the car fenders, the twisted hoods, the wood and the plaster, the cardboard and the palm fronds beachcombed from the strands, the tins and the worn-out wicker baskets, broken jugs and the springs underfoot, and bits of wire sticking out in all directions, invaded by the stacks of cigarette cartons and the towers of matchboxes. And me, and me, and me, and me, and me, huge heads in plaster rising out of the junk seas and gleaming whitely in the dark shadows. And on a warm day, we'd lie in each other's arms, naked, looking at me and me and me. And he'd want to explore. And he'd tell me that only someone who had the right key could open my body like a wardrobe. And he would. And only he had the key. And when I was open, he unlocked his hand would reach out, and whatever it touched, whether it was a splay of wire or a flange of cardboard, his fingers would bead and twist and shape and turn, and a piece of junk would birth, and a baby sculpture would slide out of the shadows to play upon my breast or perch upon my shoulder. One late afternoon, as his fingers slid from shoulder to wire, the chilly lamp threw its shadow on the wall. He became erect, excited, galvanized, his eyes gleaming in the dark as he scrabbled to his feet, and in no time, he was adding plaster. He had seen me on the wall, he said, and he must have done what, because when Olga saw the sculpture, it intrigued her, and something was different. It didn't seem invented. So she sulked. I can honestly say that I liked such modern works. He took all the bits of my face and rearranged them and did things to them so that a nose became like a huge penis or a mouth became a vulva. But I suppose he knew what he was doing because, as I found out much later, an awful lot of people wanted to buy them. So I suppose they must be good. He would say,
imitating his voice,
to displace, to contradict, to show one eye full face and one in profile. Nature does many things the way I do, but she hides them. My painting is a series of cock and bull stories. But you see, I never really cared for the idea of the famous painter. I wanted him for me, not for the world. I just liked to be with him. And I had to lie more and more to Mommy, saying I was spending the afternoon with a girlfriend. But I think she knew. Didn't a painter give her me? Pablo told me that Olga discovered me in his pictures at the Galerie Georges Petit. He told me what Tristan said.
She imitates the Romanian.
If she tries to tackle Marie-Therese with a handbag and abuse, her skull with its tiny brain will be crackled between these two huge and perfectly formed thighs, like a lemon in a nutcracker. I think he was very rude to call my thighs huge. I had to have an abortion. He didn't want a baby then, and Mama agreed. So when I was swimming, I just stopped. He was somewhere at the edge of the pool, and it was a while before he or anyone else realized. Of course, I said I had had a cramp. He was so nice to me, so kind. I was his poor Ophelia, nearly drowned in a cup of water. And when I asked him who Ophelia was, he told me of the painting of a beautiful lady floating down a stream. It was just over 2 years later that we had the baby. We'd gone to Spain in the hot summer, from Irún to San Sebastián, from Burgos to Madrid, El Escorial, Toledo, and Zaragoza, through Aragon, and then home to Barcelona. And not a journalist had so much caught sight of me. October the 5th, the Belvedere Clinic in Boulogne. I didn't know it then, but when Maya was being born, he was window shopping for a new lady friend. Doris, it happened. It was just that he always needed something, someone new, but he never stopped loving me, never. I called her Marie de la Concepcion, after Pablo's little sister who died at the age of 4 in La Coruna. Pablo and my half-sister went to the city hall to register her birth. Father unknown. What else could he do? And he being married to Olga, and he telling me that he'd ask for a divorce? And he did. But then the war in Spain broke out, and the nationalists forbade divorce to any Spanish subject. She looked so like him, did Maya. Had the same stocky shoulders, the same broad face. She was so, so pretty. He bought a house for us on the Riviera at Juan Lapine, and for 2 whole months we had him to ourselves. So much planning he had to do, the poor dear. He wrote to me in Paris, reminding me to bring the sheets and turn off the gas, the electricity, and the water.
She produces the sheaf of paper again.
I love you still more than yesterday and less than tomorrow. I will always love you, as they say. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, Marie-Therese. And he did. Well, I breastfed Maya, swam and furnished the house and breastfed Maya again. He went to Cannes to look at the boats in the harbor. And we stayed in bed until 10 in the morning, our little honeymoon. And he sang to Maya, and he sketched, and he painted. And I even got him to write letters to Sabate, his secretary, and to Tristan. He washed nappies for me. And nearly 30 years later, I was looking at the pictures in a book, pictures of works that Pablo had done at this time, which had never been seen before. And there I was, dead, my naked body being carried away by two nude women, and one of them had the dark, wavy hair of Dormer. That's just my imagination, isn't it? We all have nightmares. It's just that Pablo paints his. During the war, I moved back to Paris, Boulevard Henri IV. Pablo had a suite on the Rue des Grands Augustines. Dora, of course, liked to think of herself as his official mistress, but she never realized, none of them did, that they were only there for a few short years, whereas I was there forever. You see, there were two spiral staircases up to his studio, poor Sabate, and one for me, but he was quite forgetful at times. One afternoon, I went into him. You've been promising to marry me for so long, I said, and now it's about time that you did. And do you know what he said?
Imitating his voice.
At my age, Marie-Therese, you know, it would be a little ridiculous. Besides, there's a war on. That makes matters complicated.
And just at that point, in arrives Dora, listening behind the door, no doubt. She imitates her voice.
Look, Pablo, you're in love with me and you know it. And do you know what he did? He put his arm around me, and he said,
She imitates his voice.
Dormed, you know perfectly well that the only woman I love is Marie-Therese Walter, and that's that. But would she leave? I had to take her by the scruff of her shoulders and push her out the door.
She imitates Picasso's voice.
You know how much I love you. And I do. Then he gave me my 5 kilos of coal. Every day he did, to keep me and Maya warm. And he opened a big wardrobe.
She imitates his voice.
You see that gold? If something happens to me, it's yours. He always was a hoarder, was Pablo. But I was looking at the 2 towers of good yellow soap. I'd rather have the soap now. I said, but he just smiled and closed the door. He always loved Maya. I know he did. Sketchbook after sketchbook he filled. Maya sleeping, Maya smiling, Maya growing up. He would even try to feed her when she was a baby.
She imitates his voice.
A child who doesn't eat dies, he would say. When she was 20, he sent her to Cartier's to pick out whatever she wanted. And she did. But her father never sent the money along, so she had to do without. I suppose he must have forgotten. There was only once when I was frightened. In 1969. Of course, he was married to that woman then, Jacqueline, and the payments stopped. Well, what was I to do? I had no other money, so I wrote him a letter, didn't sign it. In the first year that we met, he did a painting, composition with letters and white hand. He always kept it with him. A monogram is on the hand, so I wrote. I say that the hand is frightening, the hand raised for false oaths, the hand that clutches the rifle, the hand that braids the barbed wire, the hand that strikes, the hand that kills. I say that her hand is wretched, the wounded hand, the hand that begs, the hand that forgets, the hand in chains, in despair, the hand of death. He never wrote back. Maya found an art dealer for me who came over from America. I didn't want to sell my Picassos, but what else could I do? I had Maya to think of. When he came, I showed him all my letters. It was cold, in my little packages wrapped in tissue. I used to clip his fingernails, and he went away, and he saw Pablo, and he asked me to sign the pictures so that I could sell them. Pablo said he would, but then Jacqueline came in. The pictures belonged to Pablo. Never would he sign them. I knew what she was, and so I went to the lawyers, and of course, he fulfilled his natural obligations under French law. So I knew he always would. Such a short time he had then. When he died, I went to his house at Ruvengag, but they wouldn't let me in. A gendarme and a gardener came out to tell me that they were suffering so much inside the chateau that they couldn't receive me. We weren't even allowed to go to the funeral. Not me, or Maya, or Claude, or Paloma, or Pablito. Just a few days before, Pablo had written to me, April the 1st.
She produces the letter.
You were the only woman that I ever loved. Pablo's son, told Pablito that Jacqueline refused to allow him to go to his grandfather's funeral. So on the morning of the funeral, Pablito drank a container of potassium chloride bleach. When they got him to hospital, it was too late to save his digestive organs. He had no money, so I ended up selling some of my Picassos, after all, to pay for the operations. I couldn't see him suffer, could I? But he died. It was an irresistible compulsion. He loved me. I loved him. Someone had to look after him. Someone had to follow him. He was my Pablo. So I went down to Jean Lepine, where we had our little honeymoon. And I was happy as I went into the garage. It's handy, having been a gymnast, I mean. I knew all about weights and balance. As I threw the rope over the beam in the garage, it was as if he was drawing the line in space as it snaked over the beam. I could see his pencil knotted neatly in one continuous line, careful not to bruise my back.
The lights slowly fade until the only thing we can see is her face. And on the back wall, a painting of the splayed-legged voluptuousness of the erstwhile Marie-Therese.
I jumped, Pablo, hoping to find your arms. And I will. I know I will. Because you're here, somewhere in this vast and echoing eternity. And I'll search, Pablo. You know I will. I'll search and I'll search, Pablo. I'll search until I find you. Pablo, my love.
Then the light fades on Marie-Therese's face. And finally, it also fades out on the image of herself in the painting. Fini.
Thanks for joining us next week on AirPlay.